In November 1941, a 23-year-old woman was wheeled into an operating room at George Washington University Hospital. She was awake when the surgeons began. When they finished, she could no longer walk. She could no longer speak clearly, and her own mother had no idea the operation had happened until it was already over. Most people remember Rose Kennedy as the unbreakable matriarch of Camelot. The truth is far darker. Rose buried 4 of her 9 children, and a 5th simply vanished. Rose Elizabeth Fitzgerald was born on July 22, 1890, in Boston's North End, and she was political royalty before she could talk. Her father was John Honey Fitzgerald, a charming, relentless machine politician who became mayor of Boston and treated his eldest daughter as his favorite campaign accessory. Rose grew up on stages and receiving lines. She learned early that a public smile is a kind of armor, and that a family is also a performance. She was bright, genuinely bright. She graduated from Dorchester High School in 1906 and dreamed of Wellesley College. But her father, under pressure from the Catholic hierarchy, sent her instead to convent schools of the Sacred Heart. The nuns taught her discipline, piety, and self-control so total it bordered on self-erasure. Those lessons would define her entire life, and one day they would cost a daughter everything. On October 7, 1914, at age 24, Rose married Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., a ferociously ambitious young banker her father had never fully trusted. Honey Fitz's instincts, it turned out, were excellent. The newlyweds moved into a modest house at 83 Beale Street in Brookline, Massachusetts. And Rose began production on a dynasty. The numbers alone are staggering. Joseph Jr. in 1915, John in 1917, Rosemary in 1918, Kathleen in 1920, Eunice in 1921, Patricia in 1924, Robert in 1925, John in 1928, and finally Ted in 1932. 9 children in 17 years. Rose ran that household like a chief executive. She famously kept a wooden box of index cards, one for every child, tracking their weights, illnesses, shoe sizes, even their dental work. Every cavity was documented. Every scuffed shoe recorded. Nothing escaped the file. Which makes what happened later all the more chilling. Because one of those 9 children was about to disappear from the record entirely. The 3rd card in the box belonged to Rosemary Kennedy. Rosemary. And Rosemary's story went wrong on the very first day. She was born at home on September 13, 1918, at the height of the influenza epidemic, and the doctor was delayed. In some accounts, a nurse instructed Rose to hold back the delivery until he arrived, and some historians, including biographer Kate Clifford Larson, believe the resulting oxygen deprivation may have contributed to what came next. It's never been proven, but something was different about Rosemary. She missed milestones. She struggled in school, eventually functioning at roughly a 4th grade level in her teens. in a family where dinner table debate was a blood sport and second place was failure, Rosemary couldn't keep up. And the Kennedys did not have a category for a child who couldn't keep up. Meanwhile, the marriage itself was rotting behind the wallpaper. Joe Kennedy was a serial adulterer, and he wasn't subtle about it. His most notorious affair was with Gloria Swanson, one of the most famous movie stars on the planet. Joe did what any devoted family man would do. He brought his mistress to the family home. And Rose? According to Swanson's own memoir, Rose sat at the table and made polite conversation with her husband's lover. Pleasant, composed, discussing fashion and travel as if nothing on earth were wrong. It was either superhuman dignity or something more disturbing. A woman who had decided that reality itself was negotiable, as long as appearances survived. She wasn't made of stone, though. While pregnant with Kathleen, Rose actually left. She went home to her father. Honey Fitz, the devout Catholic politician, counseled her that divorce was unthinkable. So Rose went back. From then on, when the pressure became unbearable, she developed her own escape hatch. Long, solitary trips to Paris and European resorts, weeks at a time, leaving the children behind. At the family compound in Hyannisport, she even had a tiny one-room shack built on the lawn, a private retreat where she read, prayed, and listened to French records, and where no one was permitted to knock. The woman who demanded total family unity kept one door permanently closed. It would not be the last thing she kept closed. By the late 1930s, the performance was working spectacularly. Joe was appointed US ambassador to Great Britain, and in 1938, the family moved to London, where they were an absolute sensation. Rosemary and her sister Kathleen were presented at court before the King and Queen. For one glittering moment, Rosemary, beautiful, warm, radiant in white, was exactly the daughter the dynasty required. Photographers adored her. She had spent her whole life desperate for that approval. In letters to her father from convent school, she had once written, "I would do anything to make you so happy." She meant it, and that desperation makes what her father did to her almost unbearable to describe. Because as Rosemary entered her early 20s, the mask slipped. She had violent mood swings. She reportedly sneaked out of her convent school at night, and the family feared, in the brutal calculus of the era, scandal. A daughter with an intellectual disability was, to Joe Kennedy, a political liability. A daughter with an intellectual disability and a social life was a catastrophe waiting to happen. Two sons were being groomed for the presidency. Nothing could be allowed to threaten that. So in the autumn of 1941, Joe Kennedy went looking for a solution. He found one, and he told no one, not his sons, not his daughters, and not his wife. What happened in that Washington operating room in November 1941 is the darkest chapter of this entire story, and it stayed buried for 46 years. It will be told in full. But first, The world had to watch Rose Kennedy become the most famous grieving mother in America. The blows began in 1944. On August 12, Joseph Jr., the golden firstborn, the son groomed for the White House, volunteered for a near-suicidal bombing mission. His experimental aircraft, packed with explosives, detonated over the English Channel. He was 29. There was no body to bury. Rose absorbed the news and appeared publicly composed, rosary in hand. Contemporary accounts record no collapse, no public tears. Household staff would later describe her as exacting and emotionally sealed rather than openly grieving. Though those accounts are second-hand, and what happened behind her closed door, no one can say. 4 years later, it happened again. Kathleen, Kick, the rebellious magnetic daughter, had already broken her mother's heart by marrying a Protestant English aristocrat, a union Rose considered a mortal offense against her faith. On May 13, 1948, Kick's small plane slammed into a mountainside in France. She was 28. And here the ice at the center of Rose Kennedy becomes genuinely frightening. According to biographer Lawrence Leamer, Rose did not attend her own daughter's funeral. Joe went alone. Reportedly, the only member of the immediate family standing at the grave. Rose's faith, it seemed, had rules. And the rules did not bend, even for a dead child. 2 children gone, and still the machine rolled forward. In 1951, Pope Pius XII elevated Rose to the rank of Papal Countess, honoring her exemplary motherhood. The irony of that citation, given what was hidden in Wisconsin, is almost too dark to process. Through the 1950s, Rose became a devastating political weapon. Hosting tea parties, charming voters, campaigning tirelessly for her son John. Reporters naturally asked about the family. 9 children, but only 8 ever seemed to appear. Where was Rosemary? The family had an answer ready, and it was a lie. A smooth, rehearsed, decades-long lie. In 1960, the performance reached its summit. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was elected President of the United States. Rose Kennedy had done it. The convent girl from the North End was now mother to the most powerful man on earth. It should have been the triumph of her life. Instead, the 1960s became a horror story that unfolded in real time in front of the entire world. It started in December 1961, when Joe suffered a catastrophic stroke that left him paralyzed and nearly speechless. The architect of the dynasty was suddenly a prisoner inside his own body, and with him silenced, his secrets began to surface. It was only now, sources indicate, that the surviving Kennedy children finally learned the full truth about their sister, where she was, and what had been done to her 20 years earlier. Eunice was reportedly shattered. Something in the family began, very slowly, to turn. Then came Dallas. On November 22, 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated in an open car. He was 46 years old. Rose was 73, and she had now outlived 3 of her 9 children. At the state funeral, surrounded by kings and presidents. She reportedly told Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, "It's wrong for parents to bury their children." 8 words, and perhaps the only crack in the armor anyone ever witnessed. It wasn't over. On June 5, 1968, Robert Kennedy, the third son, campaigning for the presidency himself, was shot in a Los Angeles hotel kitchen. He died the next day, aged 42. Rose learned of the shooting from television. 4 children now: Joe Jr., Kathleen, John, Robert, all dead before their mother, all dead before 50. A year later, in 1969, Joe Sr. followed them, and Rose stood at yet another grave. The wooden box of index cards had become a casualty list. And yet one card, the third one, still sat there, silent, its subject alive but missing from the family's story for nearly 30 years. That silence was Rose Kennedy's true life's work, and it's time to open that door. Rose lived on, astonishingly, for another quarter-century. In 1974, she published her memoir, Times to Remember, a warm, careful book in which she explained her eldest daughter's condition as the result of an accident. That was the official version. In 1984, at 94, Rose suffered a stroke of her own and spent her final 11 years in a wheelchair, watching the ocean at Hyannis Port. She turned 100 in 1990. On January 22, 1995, Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy died of pneumonia at the compound, aged 104, one of the longest lives in American political history, and one of its most heavily guarded. She was buried in Brookline, back where the story began. She had outlived 4 of her 9 children by as much as 51 years. And she went to her grave with the family's darkest secret only partially exposed. So, back to that operating room in November 1941. Here, finally, is what actually happened. Frightened by Rosemary's escalating behavior, Joe Kennedy consulted Dr. Walter Freeman, the country's most zealous evangelist, for a new procedure, the prefrontal lobotomy. Freeman promised it would calm difficult patients. Joe authorized it for his 23-year-old daughter, without her informed consent, and, according to most accounts, without telling his wife. Rosemary was mildly sedated but conscious. Surgeons drilled holes into her skull, as Dr. James Watts later described it. An instrument was inserted to sever connections in her frontal lobes, while Freeman asked her to recite prayers and sing songs, cutting until her responses stopped. When her voice fell silent, they stopped. The procedure was a catastrophe. Rosemary emerged unable to walk or speak intelligibly, her mind reduced to that of a small child. The vibrant young woman presented to the King of England 3 years earlier was gone, destroyed in an afternoon to protect a brand. And then the erasure began. Rosemary was institutionalized, first in New York, then from 1949 at St. Coletta's in Jefferson's, Wisconsin, in a private cottage built with Kennedy money. The family's public story. Rosemary was busy teaching children with special needs. too devoted to her calling to appear at campaigns. For roughly 2 decades, that fiction held. The mother who documented every cavity on index cards left her eldest daughter's fate entirely off the family record. By most accounts, Rose did not see Rosemary for more than 20 years after the surgery. Rose always maintained she'd been kept in the dark, the betrayed wife of a unilateral decision, informed only after it was done, and most historians accept that Joe alone gave the order. But in 2015, historian Kate Clifford Larson published research drawing on unsealed family papers, and it complicated that defense. Larson found evidence suggesting Rose was involved in the medical consultations that preceded the surgery, and that in later years she traveled near the Wisconsin institution without ever stopping to visit. If Larson is right, Rose's 20-year absence wasn't ignorance. It was a choice, renewed year after year. We'll likely never know exactly where the truth sits. The secret itself finally broke in 1987, when historian Doris Kearns Goodwin put the lobotomy into the public record. 46 years after the operation, Rosemary was still alive. She outlived her mother, dying in 2005, cared for to the end by nuns in Wisconsin. And there is one strange, redemptive coda. Her sister Eunice, haunted by what was done to Rosemary, forced the family toward the light. Publicly acknowledging her sister's disability and building what became the Special Olympics, a global movement born directly from the dynasty's buried shame. Rose Kennedy was celebrated for a century as the mother who endured everything. But her most devastating loss was never at a funeral. It was the daughter who didn't die, the one she tracked in every detail on an index card, and then, when the child became inconvenient, simply filed away. Thanks for watching History's Hidden Lives. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us.